The audition room was filled with a kind of nervous energy that almost anyone could feel, even before walking inside. The academy was famous not just in the city, but across the whole country, and every young musician dreamed of performing here. The large hall smelled faintly of polished wood and old music books, and the walls were decorated with photos of students who had become great artists. Every picture seemed to watch the room, reminding the new students that they were stepping into a place where talent was expected, not just hoped for. Chairs were placed in neat rows outside the room, and on every chair sat a parent or a young musician clutching their sheet music like a lifeline. Some were whispering to themselves, some were tapping their feet quickly, and some were staring into space, imagining their performance again and again. Inside the audition room itself, the air felt even heavier, not because it was hot, but because the director was sitting at the front desk. Everyone knew him. He was strict, serious, and never smiled during auditions. Students said he could tell if you made a mistake before you even touched the instrument. Many believed he enjoyed rejecting people, though no one ever said that out loud. Today, he sat with his glasses pushed to the edge of his nose, staring at the long list of names he had to evaluate. His pen tapped rhythmically on the table, making a small clicking sound that seemed much louder in the silent room. 2 other judges sat beside him, but they barely spoke. It was clear that the director's opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Every few minutes, the door opened and a nervous student entered. Some walked confidently, as if they had been preparing their whole lives. Others looked like they wished the floor would swallow them before they reached their instrument. The moment the door closed behind them, the hall outside became quiet again, as if everyone was holding their breath together. Each time a performance ended, the director would write something quickly on his paper, nod once, and call, "Next." That word carried so much weight that even the parents outside straightened up when they heard it. Among the many students waiting was a small boy who looked out of place. His shoes were dusty, his shirt was plain, and he carried no music folder like the others. While the other children rehearsed their pieces in whispers or moved their fingers in the air as if practicing, the boy simply sat still, staring at the closed door. Some parents noticed him and whispered softly to each other, wondering who he was and why he looked so unprepared. One mother even shook her head, saying, "Poor child, he must be lost." But the boy didn't react. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly why he was there. Inside the room, the director was growing impatient. He had listened to many performances already, and though some were good, none had impressed him. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh, the kind adults make when they are tired, but don't want to show it. He looked at the remaining list of names and hoped the next performer might be worth his time. For him, music was not just a skill, it was life, and he hated when people wasted it by being unprepared or average. Outside, the hall lights flickered slightly, and everyone turned their heads. The small boy looked up too, his eyes bright with a kind of determination that didn't match his shy appearance. When a staff member called the next name, the room froze for a moment. It wasn't a name anyone recognized. It wasn't someone who had been training at big schools or with expensive teachers. It was the small boy's name. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked toward the audition room. No instrument case, no music sheets, nothing but quiet confidence in his steps. People watched him with curiosity, confusion, and even a bit of pity. But the boy was not nervous. He was ready. And inside the audition room, the director had no idea that everything he believed about talent, skill, and first impressions was about to be challenged in a way he would never forget. Elias stepped into the hallway like a quiet shadow, almost unnoticed at first. He was small for his age, with hair that looked like it had been combed by the wind rather than a brush. His clothes were clean but old, and his shoes had thin scratches that told the story of long walks on rough roads. In his hands he carried nothing, not a music book, not a folder, Not even a small bag except for a worn-out backpack that looked too light to hold anything important. He stood near the wall, watching the other children with wide, curious eyes. Though he didn't speak to anyone, most of the students there were from big cities, wearing polished shoes, expensive jackets, and carrying sheet music packed neatly in glossy folders. Their parents whispered proudly about private teachers, long practice hours, and costly instruments. Standing next to them, Elias looked like an outsider who had wandered into the wrong place. A few children glanced at him and quickly looked away, uncertain whether to laugh or feel sorry for him. But Elias didn't seem bothered. He simply observed, quiet, calm, and strangely confident for a boy who appeared to have nothing. In truth, Elias had never been to a city like this before. He had woken up before sunrise in his small village, taken a crowded bus, and then walked nearly an hour to reach the academy. Most people would have been exhausted, but Elias felt only excitement. He had dreamed of this place for years. He had imagined the tall buildings, the polished floors, the shining instruments. But now that he was actually here, everything felt even bigger than he had imagined. What made Elias unique wasn't his appearance. It was the story behind his music, one that no one here knew. He had started playing on an abandoned piano in an empty community center. The keys were chipped, some didn't work, and the pedals were rusty, but Elias had treated it like a treasure. Day after day, he taught himself melodies, repeating them until his fingers understood them as naturally as breathing. Sometimes he played for the birds outside the broken windows. Sometimes he played for the silence. But mostly, he played because music felt like a language his heart already knew. He remembered the day he heard about the academy auditions. Someone had left an old newspaper on a bus bench, and on the back page was a small advertisement about scholarship opportunities for young musicians. Most children would have needed a teacher to prepare them. Elias only had his determination. But he believed in something the others here didn't know. Talent doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in struggle. As Elias waited for his name to be called, a group of parents glanced at him again. One of them whispered, "He doesn't even have a piano book. What is he here for?" Another laughed softly and said, "Maybe he just wants to see what a real audition looks like." A boy around Elias's age stared at him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, as if trying to understand how someone could show up to a music academy with nothing but a backpack. But Elias didn't look away. He met the boy's eyes with a gentle smile, not a nervous one, but a knowing one, as if he already understood something they didn't. That simple smile made the boy look away first. Inside the audition room, the director was already annoyed. The morning had been long, and he had not seen a performance that truly impressed him yet. When he flipped through the list and reached Elias's name, he frowned. Who names their child Elias with no last name given? He muttered. He assumed it must be a mistake or a joke. He had no idea that this simple name would soon shake his pride. Finally, the door opened, and the staff member called out, "Elias?" The hallway went silent. Elias stood up, dusted his pants as if preparing for something important, and walked forward. Every eye followed him, some amused, some confused, some curious. His steps were slow but firm, like someone walking toward a destiny he had already accepted. When he reached the door, he paused for a brief moment, not out of fear but out of respect for the moment he was about to enter. For him, this wasn't just an audition. It was a chance to show that greatness doesn't always come from fancy clothes, expensive teachers, or perfect backgrounds. Sometimes it comes from a boy with nothing but a dream and a heart full of music. Then he walked inside, and everything began to change. The moment Elias stepped into the audition room, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but subtle, like a soft wind entering a still room. The director, who had been leaning back with boredom etched across his face, straightened slightly in his chair. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet determination in the boy's eyes. Or maybe it was the fact that Elias looked nothing like the polished, well-trained students he had been judging all morning. The director cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. His reputation for being strict was not exaggerated. He had rejected hundreds of students over the years, and he believed he could predict who would fail the moment they walked in. To him, Elias looked like another disappointment. "So," the director said sharply, tapping his pen on the table, "where is your music sheet? Or did you forget it?" Elias shook his head gently. "I don't have one, sir." A small ripple of amusement passed between the two other judges. One raised an eyebrow. The other smirked quietly. The director set his pen down with exaggerated slowness. "No music sheet?" he repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. "That's bold." He looked the boy up and down, clearly unimpressed. "Do you even know any classical pieces? Or did you come here hoping to experiment?" Elias didn't flinch. His voice remained soft but steady. "I know a piece, sir. I've practiced it many times." The director leaned back again, letting out a small laugh that wasn't friendly at all. "If you can really play the piano well, boy, I'll kneel right here." "Yes, right here in front of everyone." The other judges chuckled quietly. The director was known for his dramatic comments, but this one felt especially cruel. He fully expected the boy to run out crying or freeze in fear, but Elias only nodded, not with arrogance, but with quiet acceptance, as though the director's challenge didn't scare him one bit. "Fine then," the director said, waving a hand dismissively. "Play, impress us. Or try to." Elias walked toward the grand piano. It was the largest and most beautiful instrument he had ever seen. The polished black surface reflected the soft lights of the room, and the golden petals gleamed like treasure. He paused beside it, running his fingers lightly along the edge. For a moment, he felt the weight of his journey, the long bus ride, the hours of walking, the years of practicing on broken keys in dusty rooms. Behind him, the director sighed loudly. "Any day now," he muttered. Elias finally sat on the bench. His legs dangled slightly because it was higher than the one he practiced on back home. He straightened his back, placed his fingers on the keys, and closed his eyes, not to remember the notes, but to feel them. Music, to him, wasn't just something he played. It was something he lived, but the director didn't see any of this. He only saw a poor, unprepared child pretending to be a musician. He leaned toward the other judges and whispered loudly enough for Elias to hear, "This should be interesting." Elias didn't react. His fingers rested gently on the keys, still as stone. For a moment, the room was silent, so silent that the ticking of a clock on the wall felt unusually loud. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the judges, a woman with soft eyes and a kinder nature than the director, leaned forward. She watched Elias with curiosity rather than doubt. Something about the boy's stillness felt different, not nervous, not confused, but focused. She tapped the director's arm gently. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at his hands." The director frowned but glanced anyway. Elias's fingers were long, slender, and relaxed, not tight or shaky like most young performers. They rested on the keys with the ease of someone who belonged there, but the director refused to be impressed. "He probably saw a pianist on TV and is copying the posture," he said dismissively. The judge didn't argue, but the look in her eyes changed. She sensed something. The director (T-potential). Elias took a slow breath. He remembered the broken piano in the community center. He remembered how the keys stuck when he pressed them, how the pedals squeaked, how the sound would echo off empty walls. This piano was different, perfect, rich, full of life. And he was ready to show what he could do with it. The director tapped the table impatiently. "Whenever you're ready," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. Elias opened his eyes, and in that moment, something unseen shifted in the room. Like a promise forming in the air, He was ready to play. The room seemed to shrink as Elias prepared to play, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Everyone expected hesitation, a shaky start, or maybe even complete failure. After all, this small boy with no music sheet and no fancy training had no chance at least. That's what the director believed. But Elias didn't look nervous. He looked calm, almost peaceful, like someone who had already accepted whatever would come. Good or bad. His fingers hovered above the keys, not touching yet, like a bird preparing to take flight. The director rolled his eyes and folded his arms, impatient but mildly curious despite himself. "Well," he said, "we don't have all day." Elias heard him, but he wasn't listening. At that moment, his mind drifted to the place where he first fell in love with music, the abandoned community center. He remembered how cold the concrete floor felt under his feet, how dust flew into the air whenever he pressed the broken piano keys, and how the room echoed every note, turning his lonely practice into something beautiful. He remembered playing until his fingers hurt, until the sun set, until he could no longer see the keys clearly. Those memories did not weaken him, they strengthened him. He lowered his hands gently onto the keys. A soft gasp came from one of the judges. They weren't expecting such confidence in his touch. But Elias still hadn't played a single note. He was simply feeling the piano, understanding it, greeting it like an old friend. The director sat up straighter without realizing it. Something about this quiet preparation felt unusual. Most young performers rushed in, eager to prove themselves. Elias was different. He moved with the patience of someone who believed deeply in what he was about to do. In the hallway outside, a few people pressed closer to the door, sensing the tension inside. A parent whispered to another, "Do you hear anything?" The other shook his head. No, maybe he froze. But inside, Elias was far from frozen. He took a deep breath, slow, deep, steady. It was the kind of breath someone takes before saying something important. Then he pressed the first key. The note was soft, almost delicate, but it floated through the room like a drop of water falling into a silent pond. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was pure, clean, honest. One of the judges blinked in surprise. The director's tapping foot stopped. Elias played another note, then another, letting a gentle melody form. The simplicity of the beginning made the room feel strangely warm, as if a curtain had been pulled away and sunlight had quietly entered. His fingers danced lightly, moving with grace that didn't match his age or appearance. The director narrowed his eyes. He wasn't impressed yet, but he was no longer bored. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. He muttered under his breath. Elias continued, and the melody grew fuller. His hands moved faster, transitioning smoothly between keys, his touch soft one moment and firm the next. His body moved with the music, not exaggerated like some performers, but naturally, like a tree swaying with the wind. What made Elias remarkable wasn't just the sound he created. It was the emotion behind it. Each note carried a story, a memory, a feeling. He played the loneliness of empty halls, the hope of early mornings, the joy of small victories, and the ache of things he wished he had but never did. His music wasn't a performance, it was a confession. The female judge placed a hand over her heart without realizing it. "Goodness," she whispered. The director's jaw tightened. He didn't want to admit it, but something was happening, something he had not expected. This boy, this quiet, poorly dressed child, was bringing the room to life. Outside, the hallway fell silent, as if the people waiting could somehow sense the shift. Elias's fingers glided through the melody with breathtaking ease. The piano responded to him like it had been waiting for someone like him, someone who didn't demand, but invited. Someone who didn't command, but connected. And then, in the middle of the piece, Elias closed his eyes. He didn't need them. The music was inside him. The director felt a strange sensation rise within him, Something he rarely felt during auditions: respect. And fear. Fear that he had misjudged this boy entirely. Fear that he had spoken too confidently. Fear that he might truly have to kneel for the first time in his life. Elias didn't know any of this. He was lost in the music, in the beauty of the moment, in the dream he had carried for so long. Every note whispered the same message. He belonged here. In the room, silent and breathless, agreed. The first note had surprised them. The growing melody had unsettled them, but what came next, no one could have predicted. As Elias continued to play, the air inside the audition room seemed to thicken with emotion. It no longer felt like a place for judgment or competition. It felt like a place where time had paused to listen. The director, who had been stubbornly trying to maintain his unimpressed expression, felt something shift inside him. At first, he tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just the acoustics of the grand piano, or the boy got lucky with the opening notes. But 10 seconds later, 20 seconds later, he knew this wasn't luck. This wasn't a coincidence. Something special was happening right before his eyes. Elias's fingers moved with confidence. Yes, but it was more than that. They moved with purpose, as if each note had been carved into his heart long before this day. He wasn't reading music. He wasn't following a teacher's instructions. He was telling a story, his story. The melody deepened, filling the room with a richness that made the walls hum softly. It was the kind of sound that reached places inside people they rarely visited, the quiet, hidden corners where memories slept. One judge felt a tear forming without understanding why. Another judge gripped his pen tightly, realizing he had stopped taking notes altogether. But the director, he felt something he had not felt in years: humility. The boy he had mocked, the one he publicly challenged, was playing with the soul of a seasoned musician. His technique was clean. His timing was natural. His transitions were effortless. But what truly stunned the director was the emotion: pure, raw, unfiltered emotion. It was something no expensive school or elite teacher could teach. Elias began building toward a more powerful section of the piece. His hands moved faster now, dancing across the keys with breathtaking speed. Yet even in the speed, there was control. Every note landed exactly where it was meant to. Every vibration felt intentional. The piano responded eagerly, as if grateful to finally be used for something meaningful after hearing so many mechanical, rehearsed performances all morning. The director leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the boy. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He didn't dare move. If he moved, he feared he might break the spell. Outside the room, a few students waiting for their turn heard faint traces of the music. They pressed their ears to the door, eyes wide. One whispered, "Is that him? The boy with no sheet music?" Another shook his head slowly. Impossible. But the music didn't lie. Inside, Elias shifted into the heart of the piece. His expression changed, his eyebrows relaxed, his breathing synchronized with the tempo, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly, just enough to show that he was not nervous at all. He was happy. Every note he played felt like a discovery. Each chord carried the weight of his struggles walking dusty roads, practicing on a broken piano, dreaming alone in a quiet room while other children went to music classes he could never afford. But instead of bitterness, his music carried gratitude. Instead of anger, it carried hope. And the director felt it all. He swallowed hard, feeling embarrassed by his earlier words, not because he might have to kneel, but because he had spoken cruelly to a child he didn't understand. He had forgotten that talent doesn't always wear a shiny coat or walk with perfect posture. Sometimes it walks into a room quietly, wearing old shoes and carrying a dream larger than its own body. The piece neared its climax, and Elias's hands moved like wind-swift, smooth, unstoppable. His eyes were still closed, trusting the piano completely. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply playing the way he had always played, honestly. Finally, the melody began to slow. The room leaned into the silence between the notes. Afraid to breathe too loudly, Elias lowered the volume, letting the final notes fall like soft rain. They lingered in the air, gentle and warm, until the last vibration faded. And then silence. A deep, powerful silence that no one dared interrupt. For the first time all day, the audition room was not filled with judgment. It was filled with awe. The director's face had changed. Completely. What he had heard was not just talent. It was genius, and he knew without any doubt. His life, and the boy's life, had just changed forever. The silence after Elias's final note felt almost sacred. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole room was afraid that even a whisper would shatter the fragile magic still floating in the air. Elias slowly opened his eyes, breathing out softly, unaware of the storm of emotions he had stirred inside every person present. The director stared at him, his mouth slightly open, his pride quietly collapsing. He tried to speak, but no words came. He had judged thousands of musicians in his career, yet he had never encountered a performance that reached so deeply without a single formal lesson behind it. The other judges exchanged glances, speechless, trying to understand how a boy like Elias, shy, quiet, and apparently untrained, could play with the heart of a world-class artist. But what they didn't know was that Elias carried a past shaped by hardship, loneliness, and an unexpected friend, a broken piano in a forgotten corner of a community center. And finally, someone was about to explain that truth. At the back of the audition room, where visitors usually stood, was a thin, elderly man with gray hair and tired eyes. His clothes were worn, his shoes old, but there was a gentleness in the way he watched Elias. Until now, no one had noticed him. He seemed to blend into the background like a painting hung too high to be seen. But when he stepped forward, everyone turned. "Excuse me," he said softly, unsure if he was even allowed to speak. His voice trembled not from fear, but from emotion. I think you should know something about this boy." The director blinked, startled. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "And you are?" "His neighbor," the old man said. "I've known Elias since he was very small. I came today because he had no one else to accompany him. His parents work far away. They couldn't come." The director stiffened, suddenly aware of how quickly he had judged Elias earlier. The old man continued, his eyes moistening. "Elias didn't grow up with teachers. He didn't grow up with lessons or classes or instruments made for students. He had nothing but curiosity and a heart full of music." The female judge leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Then, how did he learn to play like this?" The old man smiled sadly. "He taught himself." The director frowned, struggling to accept what he was hearing. Taught himself? This level of skill? Impossible. But the old man nodded. Every day after school, he went to the abandoned community center. It used to offer music programs many years ago. But now it is empty. Forgotten. The piano there is old, broken. Half the keys don't even make sound anymore. Most children in our village don't even go near it. But Elias did. He paused, his voice thick with pride. He cleaned the dust, fixed what he could, and practiced for hours. Rain or shine. He would stay until the sky turned dark and I had to go find him. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He played because music was the only thing in his life that never disappointed him. The room grew still. Even the director lowered his eyes, ashamed. "And the piece he played today," the old man continued, "it isn't from a book. He created it. Every melody, every rise and fall, every emotion. It's his own composition. Born from years of playing on broken keys." Gasps filled the room. Elias stared at the floor, embarrassed by the attention. He hadn't meant to make himself seem special. He only wanted a chance to learn, to grow, to become someone better through music. The director slowly removed his glasses, rubbing them as if clearing away old, stubborn pride. He looked at Elias differently now, not as a poor, unprepared boy, but as a miracle he almost dismissed. One judge whispered, "A self-taught prodigy." Another whispered, "This is talent you see once in a lifetime." The old man placed a hand gently on Elias's shoulder. "He never complained," he said softly. "Never asked for anything. He didn't even know what auditions meant when he saw the notice. But he came anyway. Alone." Elias looked up, his eyes honest and unsure. "I just wanted to try." Those simple words hit the director harder than any music could. A boy with nothing, no teacher, no money, no guidance, had just played with more passion and purity than all the trained students he had seen that day. In that moment, something became very clear to everyone in the room. Elias wasn't just talented. He was extraordinary. And his story, just like his music, was only beginning. For a long moment, the audition room remained frozen, as if no one knew what to do next. Elias stood quietly beside the piano, his hands resting gently on the instrument, as if thanking it. The old man stood behind him, filled with quiet pride. The judges, still stunned, struggled to find words. But the director, whose challenge had sparked everything, felt a heat rising in his face. It wasn't anger. It was something much heavier, shame. He had mocked the boy. He had doubted him. And now, after witnessing a performance that had shaken him to the core, he could no longer hide behind his pride. Slowly, the director stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor was the only sound in the room. All eyes turned to him, expecting another harsh comment or perhaps an attempt to reclaim control. But the man's expression had changed completely. His stern mask had cracked, revealing a humility no one had ever seen from him before. He walked toward Elias with steady but heavy steps. Each step felt like a confession, an apology, a surrender. The other judges watched with wide eyes. They had worked beside this man for years, yet they had never witnessed him show vulnerability. When the director reached the center of the room, right where he had arrogantly made his promise, he stopped. He looked at Elias, a boy who didn't even realize how deeply he had impacted the room. The director took a slow breath, and then, in front of everyone, he knelt. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by complete silence. It was shocking, unbelievable, almost surreal. The director, feared by students and respected by professionals, had dropped to his knees before a 12-year-old boy. Elias's eyes widened in confusion. "Sir," he whispered softly, unsure if he should say anything at all. The director lowered his head, his voice quiet but trembling with sincerity. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I doubted you. I mocked you. I treated you like you didn't belong here when you, more than anyone today, have proven that you do." The judges exchanged looks of disbelief. They had never expected to hear such words from the director, especially not addressed to a child. He continued, still kneeling, "I told myself I understood music. I told myself I could judge talent by appearances, by backgrounds, by resumes. But you have reminded me what real music is. It is not perfection. It is expression, emotion, truth." Elias stared at him, unsure what to do. He had never seen an adult kneel before him. He had never seen anyone in authority humble themselves so deeply. He glanced at the old man behind him, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Sir," Elias said softly, "you don't have to kneel. I'm not upset." The director lifted his head, his eyes shining with something that almost looked like tears. "But I am," he said. "I let my pride speak louder than my heart. Today, you taught me a lesson I will never forget." Slowly, he stood up again, brushing his knees with his hands. But the shame remained on his face, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that transforms. He turned to the other judges. "I think we all agree," he said, his voice stronger now, "that what we witnessed today was not just an audition, it was a masterpiece." The female judge nodded immediately, without question. The second judge added, "This boy has a gift. A rare one." The director faced Elias again. "You came here with nothing but your heart and your music, and that was more than enough." Outside the door, the students who had been listening whispered excitedly. Word began to spread through the hallway. The director knelt. The director actually knelt. Even parents stood in disbelief. The director cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Elias," he said formally, "on behalf of this academy, I would like to offer you our highest honor, a full scholarship." Elias blinked. He had never imagined such a moment. He had come hoping to simply be heard. He had not expected to be celebrated, but the director wasn't finished. "We don't just want to teach you," he said. "We want to learn from you." The room grew warm with emotion. The old man behind Elias wiped a tear from his eye. Elias stood still, overwhelmed, his young heart trying to hold the weight of a dream finally unfolding. This was more than acceptance. This was the moment his entire life changed. The scholarship offer hung in the air like a bright light, and for a moment, Elias didn't breathe. He didn't know whether to smile or cry or stand perfectly still. His heart felt too full, too surprised, too overwhelmed to choose any reaction at all. The director's words echoed in his ears, words he had never imagined a man of such importance would say to someone like him. A full scholarship. Not just entrance. Not just approval. A chance at a new life. The old man behind him let out a shaky laugh, a sound mixed with joy and disbelief. He gently squeezed Elias's shoulder. "See, my boy?" he whispered. "All those evenings in that dusty room. They meant something." Elias nodded slowly. But the truth was, even he couldn't quite believe what was happening. All he had brought with him was a dream, nothing more. No fancy clothes, no teachers, no experience in big competitions. Just his music and his determination. And now, here he was, standing in the center of a room where the director himself had knelt for him. But the moment wasn't finished. A door opened quietly, and more students, unable to hold back their curiosity, peeked inside. They saw Elias, standing in front of the judges, the director speaking with unusual gentleness, and the old man wiping tears from his cheeks. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That boy? The one with no sheet music? He's the one who made the director kneel? He must be amazing." For the first time in his life, Elias wasn't invisible. He was unforgettable. The director walked to him again, but this time there was no arrogance, no impatience. Only respect. He extended his hand. "Elias," he said softly, "if you accept our offer, you will have teachers who will guide you, instruments to support your talent, and opportunities most children only dream of." Elias stared at the director's hand, then slowly reached out his own. Their fingers met in a firm, warm handshake, the official beginning of a new chapter. "I accept," Elias said. The judges smiled. The old man sighed with relief. Even the students at the door smiled softly, sensing that they had just witnessed a moment that would become part of the academy's history. But acceptance was only the first part of the transformation. Within minutes, staff members arrived to gather Elias's information. They spoke kindly to him, asking where he lived, if he needed temporary housing, if he had someone who could help him transition into the academy. Elias answered shyly, unused to so much attention. He kept glancing at the old man, who nodded proudly each time, as if saying, "You deserve this." The director stood nearby, unable to take his eyes off Elias's small figure. The boy who had entered the room quietly and unnoticed was now the brightest presence in it. And the director knew he had nearly thrown away a miracle simply because it didn't look the way he expected. He cleared his throat and addressed the other students who had gathered near the door. Let this be a lesson to all of you, he said. Talent has no uniform, genius has no dress code. And greatness often walks through the door when you least expect it. The students nodded, some embarrassed by how they had judged Elias earlier, some inspired, some curious to learn from him. When the paperwork was done, the old man touched Elias's cheek gently. Your parents, he said softly, will be so proud. Elias's eyes glistened. I'll practice hard, he whispered. I won't waste this chance. The director stepped forward once more, but this time he spoke not as a judge, not as a critic, not as an authority, but as a man who had rediscovered the meaning of music. Elias, he said, we don't want you to change who you are. We want you to grow from who you are. Promise me you'll keep that heart in your music. Elias nodded. I promise. As they left the room together, Elias the old man, and the belief of everyone behind them, it felt like the beginning of a legend. The halls that once whispered doubts now whispered admiration. The student stepped aside as he passed, not out of pity, but out of respect. Elias didn't walk like a boy unsure of his place anymore. He walked like someone who finally understood he belonged. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was only the first chapter of a much greater story, one he was ready to write with every note he would play from this day onward.